Marcus Reed stared at the official deed in his hands, the embossed seal catching the afternoon light streaming through his apartment window. His grandfather's property, 5 acres of wooded land with a modest cabin nestled among tall pines, was now his responsibility. At 32, Marcus had built a comfortable life as a software engineer in the city, his days filled with code and coffee, far removed from the rural tranquility his grandfather had cherished. "I haven't been there in 15 years, Marcus murmured to himself, memories of childhood fishing trips floating to the surface of his mind. Those summer weekends spent learning to bait hooks and identify birdsong seemed like they belonged to someone else's life now. 3 days later, Marcus turned his sedan onto the gravel road leading to the property. The familiar scent of pine and earth greeted him as he parked beside the weathered cabin. For a moment, he could almost hear his grandfather's voice, gruff but kind, explaining how to properly clean a fish or build a campfire. The cabin itself seemed smaller than he remembered, its wooden exterior silvered with age, but still sturdy. Marcus walked the perimeter, noting repairs he'd need to make to the roof and porch. As he ventured farther from the cabin, following a path his feet somehow remembered, he noticed something odd through the trees, the unmistakable sounds of construction. Frowning, Marcus pushed through the underbrush until he reached a clearing. His stomach dropped. Where there should have been nothing but more trees and perhaps the distant shimmer of the lake, construction crews were busy erecting what appeared to be a substantial home. Foundation laid, framing nearly complete, the structure was clearly meant to be impressive. "Excuse me," Marcus called out, approaching a man studying blueprints spread across the bed of a truck. "I think there's been some mistake. This is private property." The foreman, identified by his hard hat and the respect shown by workers passing by, barely looked up. "No mistake. This is Rolling Pines HOA land, plot 37B. If you've got concerns, take it up with Karen Winters. She's the HOA president." "But this is my property," Marcus insisted, pulling out his phone to show the property boundaries he'd studied before driving out. "According to the survey, your construction is at least 50 feet over the line." The foreman finally looked at him, expression caught between annoyance and boredom. "Look, buddy, I just build where they tell me. Take it up with the HOA." Marcus did exactly that, calling the number the foreman reluctantly provided. Karen Winters answered on the 4th ring, her voice professionally pleasant until Marcus explained the situation. "That land was meant to be part of our development," she said, her tone hardening instantly. "Your grandfather refused to sell it to us for years. The previous board already approved Melissa Davidson's home construction. But I have the deed and property survey clearly showing." "Listen, Mr. Reed," Karen interrupted. "Rolling Pines is a prestigious community. You wouldn't want to make enemies in such a nice place, especially if you're planning to sell that old cabin. Perhaps we should meet to discuss this, reasonably." The threat beneath her polite words was unmistakable. As Marcus ended the call, he stared at the partially constructed house invading his property. His grandfather had taught him many things during those long-ago summers, but dealing with entitled property developers hadn't been one of them. "This isn't over," he muttered, already searching his contacts for a good property lawyer. Diane Zhang's office exuded competence. Minimalist furniture, neatly organized law books, and framed victories in property disputes adorning the walls. The attorney listened intently as Marcus explained his situation, occasionally jotting notes on a yellow legal pad. "They're completely in the wrong," she said once he finished, pushing her glasses up her nose. "I've dealt with aggressive HOAs before, but building on clearly deeded property is brazen even by their standards." By that afternoon, Diane had drafted a cease and desist order, complete with copies of the property survey, deed, and tax records proving Marcus's ownership. She promised to have it delivered to the HOA board and construction company first thing the next morning. Don't expect immediate compliance, she warned. HOAs, like rolling pines, tend to believe their own authority supersedes actual law. Her prediction proved accurate. 3 days later, Marcus drove out to check on the property, only to find construction continuing unabated, if anything, at an accelerated pace. Workers avoided eye contact as he took photos documenting the encroachment. That evening, his curiosity about Melissa Davidson, the woman whose dream home was being built on his land, led him down a digital rabbit hole. Her social media presence was extensive, a successful real estate agent specializing in luxury properties for discerning clients. Numerous photos at charity galas alongside Karen Winters, and several posts about her upcoming perfect custom home with sunset views worth every penny. One post from 6 months ago caught his attention. Melissa and Karen toasting champagne with the caption, "When your bestie helps make your dream home a reality." #views for days, #lakefront living. They knew exactly what they were doing, Marcus muttered to his laptop screen. The next morning, Marcus and Diane arrived unannounced at Melissa Davidson's real estate office. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition. Diane's reputation apparently preceded her, but she reluctantly showed them to Melissa's office. Melissa greeted them with practiced charm but evaporated the moment Diane introduced herself. The real estate agent's perfectly manicured nails drummed against her desk as Marcus calmly explained the property boundary issue. "I've invested over $300,000 already," Melissa said, her voice tight. "Karen assured me the land was part of the development. I'm not stopping construction." "The property is legally Mr. Reed's," Diane replied. "Construction needs to cease immediately, or we'll pursue all available legal remedies." Melissa's smile returned, brittle and cold. "Do you have any idea who serves on the county zoning board? Or who plays golf with 3 circuit court judges every Sunday?" "Karen does." She leaned forward. "This isn't the city, Mr. Reed. Things work differently here." As they left the office, Diane's phone chimed with an email notification. "And so it begins," she said grimly, showing Marcus her screen. The HOA was suing him, claiming adverse possession of the property edge based on the absurd premise that his grandfather had abandoned the land by letting it grow naturally. "They're trying to bury us in legal proceedings," Diane explained as they walked to their cars. "Even with the facts on our side, this could take years to resolve in court." Marcus stared back at the office building where Melissa was probably already calling Karen. "Then we need to find another way," he said, thinking of his grandfather's stubborn determination whenever faced with a challenge. "There has to be something we're missing." The cabin's attic was stifling in the late afternoon heat. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead as he sorted through boxes of his grandfather's possessions. Diane had suggested gathering any evidence that his grandfather had actively maintained the property borders, something that would destroy the HOA's adverse possession claim. "Come on, Grandpa," Marcus muttered. "You never threw anything away. There has to be something here." His grandfather, James Reed, had been meticulously organized in his own peculiar way. Marcus found boxes labeled by year, containing everything from tax records to handwritten maintenance logs. He carefully photographed entries noting cleared eastern property line and removed fallen trees along southern border, creating a consistent record spanning decades. "Take that, Karen," he said with grim satisfaction, sending the photos to Diane. As night fell, Marcus's phone chimed with a message from his lawyer. "This is excellent. Their adverse possession claim is falling apart. Still, something nagged at him. His grandfather wouldn't have just documented maintenance. He would have had some kind of contingency plan. James Reed had always been 3 steps ahead, especially when it came to protecting what was his. Near midnight, bleary-eyed, and considering calling it a day, Marcus opened a file labelled simply Power. Inside, he found an aged document with the letterhead of Midwest Energy Corporation. The legalese was dense, but as Marcus read, his fatigue evaporated. 20 years ago, when Rolling Pines was first being developed, the power company had needed to install equipment on the edge of his grandfather's property to service the new neighborhood. Rather than selling the land outright, James Reed had granted an easement with extraordinary conditions. He retained ownership of the utility rights, which could be revoked with 30 days' notice if certain conditions weren't met. One condition stood out. A 100-foot undeveloped natural buffer must be maintained around all utility equipment to ensure proper access and safety. Marcus checked the property survey again, confirming what he already suspected. Melissa's house wasn't just on his property, it was being built directly within that mandated buffer zone. At first light, Marcus drove to Diane's office, document in hand. The attorney's eyes widened as she read. "Your grandfather was very clever," she said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "He essentially owns the power rights to the entire development." "Is this legally enforceable?" Marcus asked. Diane nodded, already pulling reference books from her shelves. "The agreement is notarized, properly filed with the county, and registered with the Public Utilities Commission. It's ironclad." She made several calls, speaking in hushed legal terms that left Marcus both impressed and confused. After the final call, she turned to him with renewed confidence. "I just spoke with a contact at Midwest Energy. The HOA is already in technical breach of the agreement. They've failed to maintain the required buffer zone, exactly where Melissa's house is being built." "What does that mean for us?" Marcus asked. "It means," Diane said, her voice carrying the first hint of triumph since they'd started this fight, "that you have every legal right to revoke their power access with 30 days' notice." Marcus sat back, trying to absorb the implications. The entire development, all those homes. "Every single one," Diane confirmed. "And here's the best part. The power company tells me they've been trying to renegotiate this easement for years. Rolling Pines has expanded well beyond its original footprint, and they need to upgrade the equipment. Your grandfather refused to discuss changes until, as he put it, they needed it badly enough to pay what it's worth." For the first time since discovering the construction, Marcus laughed. He was playing the long game all along. "Very long," Diane agreed. "And now the power is quite literally in your hands." "I don't want to start a war," Marcus said, sitting across from Diane in her office the following morning. "But I do want my property respected and the construction stopped." Diane nodded, spreading several documents across her desk. "That's why we're changing strategies. Instead of a prolonged legal battle where they can use delays and local connections against us, we leverage your grandfather's foresight." Their plan took shape quickly. Rather than continuing the expensive court battle, they would notify Midwest Energy of the easement violation and Marcus's intention to exercise his right to revoke access with the required 30 days' notice. By afternoon, they sat across from Patricia Hernandez, Senior Rights-of-Way Manager at Midwest Energy's regional office. The woman's professional demeanor softened as she reviewed the documents. "I remember your grandfather," she said, surprising Marcus. "He was extraordinarily particular about the terms of this agreement. Now I understand why." "Was he difficult to work with?" Marcus asked. Patricia chuckled. Fair but exacting. He made us replant native species after installation and insisted on quarterly inspections. She tapped the easement document. As for this situation, you're well within your rights. Rolling Pines has been in technical violation for at least 3 years, and we've documented it in multiple inspection reports. You have? Diane leaned forward. Oh yes, Patricia said, pulling a folder from her cabinet. We've sent the HOA numerous notices about encroachments in the buffer zone. Small things at first, garden sheds, landscaping, but we've been especially concerned about this new construction. It directly interferes with our access routes. She showed them inspection photographs clearly documenting the violations, each report stamped with dates and GPS coordinates. Why haven't you enforced the buffer requirements? Marcus asked. Patricia sighed. Corporate decision. Rolling Pines is a high-consumption area, and management didn't want to rock the boat. But between us, she lowered her voice. That HOA has been a nightmare. They blocked our maintenance crews, demanded we reschedule emergency repairs because they were having community events, even threatened our workers with trespassing charges despite our legal right of access. This information shifted something in Marcus's thinking. So if I were to revoke the easement, we'd be legally required to disconnect service after the 30-day notice period, Patricia confirmed. But I'll be honest, we'd prefer not to. That equipment services over 80 homes now, and the disruption would be significant. What would your preferred solution be? Diane asked. Ideally, a new easement agreement with proper enforcement provisions and updated compensation. Patricia hesitated, then added, Our regional director has actually budgeted for acquisition of permanent utility rights in that area. Your grandfather turned down previous offers, but current market value would be. She wrote a figure on a notepad and slid it across the desk. Marcus's eyebrows rose at the 6-figure sum. That's just a preliminary estimate, Patricia added. It would require formal appraisal. On the drive back to the cabin, Marcus and Diane discussed their options. We could accept their offer immediately, Diane suggested. Marcus shook his head, his grandfather's strategic thinking now flowing through his own mind. No, we use this as leverage, but we don't sell until the HOA resolves the property dispute completely. Karen and Melissa need to understand there are consequences. Hardball, Diane said with approval. I like it. That evening, Marcus drafted a formal notice of easement violation and intent to revoke, while Diane prepared a settlement proposal for the HOA. Both documents would be delivered simultaneously, the stick and the carrot. 30 days, Marcus said, signing the papers. Let's see how quickly Karen can change her tune when the lights are about to go out. The Rolling Pines Community Centre buzzed with tension. Word of the emergency HOA meeting had spread quickly, with residents speculating about the cryptic agenda item, urgent utility matter. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, accompanied by Diane and Patricia from Midwest Energy, finding the parking lot already filled to capacity. Karen Winters stood at the front of the room, her posture rigid as she watched the trio enter. Her eyes narrowed at Patricia's company logo, then flickered with unmistakable alarm. Across the room, Melissa Davidson sat with arms crossed, her expression a mixture of defiance and unease. This meeting will come to order, Karen announced at exactly 7 p.m., her voice carrying a forced confidence. We have an urgent matter to discuss regarding the illegal construction on my client's property and the imminent termination of power to this development, Diane interjected smoothly, rising from her seat. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen's face flushed. This is outrageous. You can't just interrupt. Actually, I believe it's my meeting to interrupt, Marcus said, stepping forward. Since I now control whether your homes have electricity in 27 days. The room erupted. Homeowners turned to each other in confusion and alarm, voices rising until a silver-haired man in the second row stood and bellowed enough. The room fell silent. The man turned to Karen. I'm Howard Chen, retired circuit judge and Rolling Pines resident for 12 years. I'd like to hear exactly what's going on from them. He pointed to Marcus and his allies. With practiced precision, Diane and Patricia explained the situation, the property encroachment, the easement agreement, and the documented violations. Patricia projected photos showing the construction inside the protected buffer zone, alongside the formal notices previously sent to the HOA. As understanding dawned across the room, attention shifted to Karen and Melissa. Is this true? Demanded a woman near the front. Are you building on someone else's land? The situation is complicated, Karen began, her voice tight. The previous board believed it. Show them the documents, Karen. Melissa suddenly interrupted, her voice brittle. Show them what you showed me when you convinced me to build there. Karen paled. That's not appropriate for. I have copies, Melissa said, standing to distribute papers to those nearby. Boundary documents Karen provided, allegedly showing the land was part of Rolling Pines common areas. Howard Chen examined the papers, then looked up sharply. These are dated last year. The development boundaries were established 20 years ago. And they're not even properly notarized, another resident added, examining her copy. You told me that land was part of the development. Melissa shouted at Karen, her composure cracking. You showed me these falsified documents. The room descended into chaos again as residents began demanding answers. Howard Chen raised his hands for silence. As someone with 40 years of legal experience, he said gravely, what I'm seeing appears to be fraud, misrepresentation, and potential criminal conduct. He turned to Karen. I move for your immediate resignation from the board, and I suggest you retain counsel. You can't do that, Karen sputtered. I've been president for 7 years. I've increased property values by building on land that isn't ours and risking our power supply. A man called from the back. I second the motion for resignation. Within minutes, a formal vote had been taken. Karen found herself stripped of her position by a margin of 47-3, the only supporters being her husband and Melissa, whose vote seemed more obligatory than supportive. As the meeting reorganized under Howard Chen's temporary leadership, Marcus presented his terms. Immediate cessation of construction on his property, removal of all materials, restoration of the land, compensation for legal fees, and a formal acknowledgement of his property boundaries. Additionally, he added, looking directly at the former board members, I want a public apology. Howard nodded. Those terms seem entirely reasonable given the circumstances. Does anyone object? The room remained silent, save for the sound of Karen gathering her belongings and storming out, the door slamming behind her. Well then, Howard said, turning to Marcus with the wariness of someone who had seen too much pettiness in his career, it seems we have the beginnings of a resolution. 2 weeks after the explosive HOA meeting, Marcus sat on his grandfather's, now his, front porch, watching a team of landscapers carefully replanting native vegetation where Melissa's foundation had been. The dismantling had been swift once the new HOA board, led by Howard Chen as interim president, had approved the settlement agreement. His phone buzzed with a message from Diane. Final paperwork filed with County. Property boundaries officially reaffirmed and recorded. Congratulations. Marcus smiled, feeling a weight lift that he hadn't realized he'd been carrying. In the distance, a pickup truck approached along the gravel drive. Howard Chen's vehicle, now a familiar sight. Beautiful day, the retired judge called as he climbed out, carrying a folder. Perfect for celebrating victory. They settled into the weathered Adirondack chairs that Marcus had recently restored, overlooking the area where construction equipment had stood just weeks before. The new board approved the final settlement package, Howard said, handing over the folder. Restoration costs, legal fees, and a goodwill payment that should cover your cabin renovations. Melissa contributed separately. Apparently she's eager to make amends. How is she doing? Marcus asked, genuinely curious. Howard chuckled. Surprisingly well. Once she stopped blaming everyone else, she turned her energy toward finding a legitimate lot. She's building on the north side now, with all proper permits quadruple-checked by yours truly. And Karen. Howard's expression sobered, facing charges for document falsification. The prosecutive's going easy since she's agreed to pay restitution, but her real estate license has been suspended pending investigation. Marcus nodded, finding no joy in Karen's downfall, but satisfaction in justice being served. And the power company easement. That's actually why I came by, Howard said. The new board has authorized me to negotiate fair terms. Midwest Energy is offering market value, plus a premium for the clean resolution. They discussed details as the afternoon sun slanted through the pines. By the time Howard left, they had sketched out an agreement that honored his grandfather's foresight while securing the community's future needs. The following week, Marcus took a leave of absence from his software job. What had started as necessary visits to handle the property dispute had rekindled his connection to this place. While cleaning out the cabin's back room, he discovered his grandfather's workshop, a space he'd never been allowed to enter as a child. Inside, beneath dusty tarps, stood exquisite handcrafted furniture. A cherrywood dining table, its surface lustrous even under years of dust. Elegant chairs with intricate joinery. A rocking chair that seemed to invite sitting. Each piece came with detailed notebooks documenting the process, materials, and techniques. You were holding out on me, Grandpa, Marcus whispered, running his fingers over the smooth wood. 6 months later, the cabin had transformed. Modern amenities now complemented the rustic charm, and the workshop hummed with activity as Marcus spent weekends learning his grandfather's craft. His first completed project, a small side table, sat proudly in the living room, imperfect but earnest. The land where Melissa's house had begun now flourished as a wildflower meadow, deliberately cultivated with native species to attract butterflies and birds. Marcus had installed a simple bench at the edge, where the view of the sunset justified all the struggle to protect this place. Somewhat to his surprise, Marcus had become integrated into the community. Howard had convinced him to join the HOA Architectural Committee. To ensure this never happens again, the judge had insisted. The monthly meetings were actually enjoyable, focused on preservation and thoughtful development rather than petty power plays. 1 year to the day after discovering the construction, Marcus sat on his grandfather's, truly his now, front porch, sipping coffee as dawn broke over the trees. A family of deer grazed peacefully at the edge of the meadow where conflict had once raged. His phone buzzed with a message from Melissa. Housewarming party this weekend. Legitimate property this time. Would mean a lot if you came. Marcus smiled and typed his reply. I'll bring a handmade housewarming gift. As he set his phone down, He could almost feel his grandfather's approval in the morning breeze, a legacy of principle and foresight that had protected not just land, but a way of life worth preserving.